But we're going to go ahead and move on to the next story here about RFK Jr. Now, if you have not heard this interview, please go watch the entire interview. It's on a channel called Unheard. I actually was not familiar with this podcast until this interview happened. Two things have happened here. RFK Jr. has come out to speak pretty candidly about the CIA in two different ways. One, in reference to their involvement in elections. I know they've participated in foreign elections. He doesn't specify in this interview whether it was foreign elections or domestic, but we'll get into that. And two, their possible involvement in killing his uncle. Let's go ahead and get started with this one first. I have two clips I want to show you, but this is the interview from Unheard Podcast. So it's called Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We Need a Peaceful Revolution. Definitely watch the whole interview if you have time. But for right now, we're going to focus on this aspect here about the CIA.
We don't want constant wars in our country. We can't afford them.
So do you see yourself finishing the job they started then? Do you want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind?
I think the CIA needs to be reorganized in a way. You know, most of the people who work at the CIA are patriotic Americans. They're very, very good public servants.
Hold on one second. Greenwald did not bash RFK Jr. Your title suggested he did. No, it doesn't. The title says Glenn Greenwald slams 2024, comma, and then it goes to the next story, which is RFK Jr. CIA. I think you missed the comma. Okay, let's try this again. Sorries.
We don't want constant wars in our country. We can't afford them.
So do you see yourself finishing the job they started then? Do you want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind?
I think the CIA needs to be reorganized in a way. You know, most of the people who work at the CIA are patriotic Americans. They're very, very good public.
No. See, this is where he has this statement on Twitter too, and people were really not happy with it. It's like the CIA is an agency. It doesn't matter what people you have in it. The agency itself is corrupt. So this is where I disagree with him about this. Like he's trying to do both sides. Like he will say that the CIA is corrupt, they've done bad things, etc. But then he'll also say what he just said here, which is like there are good people in the CIA. I don't agree with that. I don't think there are. It's just like the whole thing with like the police department, right? Like we used to say this before, like there are some cops that are bad cops. No, the whole system is corrupt. So it doesn't matter. You're going into the system. So it's the system that needs to be dismantled. You have to change the system. The good people that come in aren't good once they get there. And I think that's something I would like to get RFK Jr. to understand, that once you go into that agency, either you are going to change or you're going to be removed. They're not going to want you to be a part of it. You know what I mean? So you have to think about the good people, right? The people who try to do the right thing. Where are those people now? If we want to look at like the NSA, for example, another one of those alphabet letter agencies, Edward Snowden was one of the good people. You see where he's at now. You see what I mean? So I disagree with him with that. I don't understand why he thinks there's good people. I don't think there's good people.
Servants, and we need them to function. But I think we really need to separate the espionage functions of that agency and the plans division, the division that actually does dirty tricks, that kills people, that makes wars, that, you know, that involves itself in actions, because you can't, because what happens is that tail, that the operations tail begins to wag the espionage dog. The term espionage means basically information gathering and analysis, and that is the function that we want that the CIA was created to perform. And very, very early on, Alan Dulles essentially corrupted the purpose of it by getting the CIA involved in assassinations and fixing elections and
Bingo, that part right there. This part right here. This is the part I think that threw people. People are like, wait a minute. What did he just say?
Purpose of it by getting the CIA involved in assassinations and fixing elections and
that part there about fixing the elections. So the question that has come up since this interview, and there's another one that just happened too, was he referring to foreign elections, which I think some of us knew about that, or was he also referring to domestic ones as well? Let me let him go on.
The CIA has been involved now in fixing in coup d'etats or attempted coup d'etats in about a third of the countries in the world, most of them democracies. So our national policy as a country is to promote democracy. The CIA's policy has been the opposite. And
so when Joe Biden talks about we need democracy and Ro Khanna says we need to protect our democracy, RFK Jr. is letting you know that one of the very agencies that we have in this country, the CIA, works against that democracy. So how are you going to have democracy if you have alphabet letter agencies in the United States actively working against it? Something to think about, people.
It has been at odds with the United States. So, and I think part of that, my father recognized this too. His plan was to reorganize the CIA along those lines to separate the espionage and the analysis and information gathering functions from the black functions, because otherwise the espionage section sees its job as justifying all of these these nefarious activities they're involved in, and there's no accountability. So there's never any accountability. And they do, you overthrow a government in Iraq, and what happens? You create ISIS.
Yep.
You then get involved in Syria from ISIS, and you drive 2 million civilian or 2 million refugees into Europe, which destabilizes democracy all over Europe and basically causes Brexit. And that is that's the outcome of what the CIA considers a successful operation to depose Saddam Hussein. Is it really successful? I don't think so.
That part right there, we really need to talk about for a second. His father, one of the things that he wanted to do was to separate those fractions of the CIA. Like he wanted, let's pull away the part that has to deal with like the espionage and separate that from the part that wants to deal with like the assassinations and like the election interference and things like that. Let's separate those two. And that makes me wonder, is that the reason why Bobby Kennedy is gone? Because he'll get into that too, about how he believes that they not only tried to kill his uncle, but also his father. So is that why Bobby Kennedy was killed? Because he wanted to reorganize the CIA. He wanted to make changes there. It makes you wonder. And then he talks about their involvement with overthrowing, regimes and taking leaders out. And so Saddam Hussein is a perfect example that he mentions, because this is something we need to point back to. When the US government overthrew Saddam Hussein, that actually gave rise to ISIS. Now, I've told people this before, and people are like, no, that doesn't make any sense. No, it does. Because even though Saddam Hussein was a dictator, Saddam Hussein was actually able to keep those other radical groups in check. The moment they overthrew him, they removed him, that let those groups have more power. There was no one there to check them anymore. This is exactly why the United States government should not intervene in other countries, should not come in and do regime change, should not come in and overthrow their leaders, because this is what happens. So this is going to sound kind of crazy, but if the United States would have stayed out of that, would we have even had ISIS? We may never know. So that's a big part. I'm glad that he mentioned that because I think that's important to point out. But that's just one example. There's been multiple examples where the U.S. has intervened, overthrown leaders, and then the people in that country were worse off than they were before U.S. intervention. Let's go on.
And unfortunately, we have a 60-year war with Iraq, and that war began when the CIA overthrew the first democratically elected government in the 6,000-year history of Persia. And we are still living with the blowback from that operation. And there's no accountability, and these agencies need to be accountable, and I would break up the CIA in a way that would make them accountable.
So he said that he would break up the CIA in a way that would make them accountable. But would they let that happen? And this is the question. This is what I'm saying. Is that what Bobby Kennedy, RFK, not RFK Jr., sorry, RF Kennedy, original Robert Kennedy, excuse me. Was that what he wanted to do? And is RFK Jr. trying to succeed in an area where his father didn't have the opportunity to complete that mission? Is he trying to come in and complete that mission? And if so, do you guys think that they're going to let him do that? Let's go on a little bit more.
If I could just ask more generally, the way you talk about the CIA, the way you talk about a lot of these agencies, emphasizing, as you put it, that people have been lied to, that the heads of these people are, that these organizations are corrupt, that the media is corrupt. At the same time, you talk about how you want to bring people together and you're worried about how divided society is. Is there not a sense that your rhetoric is divisive in that it leads people to believe that a big chunk of their own country is kind of against them? There's like an enemy within in the RFK worldview, and that needs to be destroyed. How do you respond to that sense?
But there is an enemy within. Like, there is an enemy within, and maybe more Americans will wake up to this at some point. But should you trust these agencies? No. Do you trust the FBI? Do you trust the CIA? Do you trust the NSA after what happened with Edward Snowden? Do you really trust these agencies? I don't trust these agencies. So is it necessarily divisive because you are alerting the American people that there are issues with these agencies and they need to be resolved? Is that necessarily divisive? I don't think that's divisive. I think that's education. Yes, some Americans may be upset to find out that their beloved agencies that they were taught in school or there to serve and protect and really help the people are not really doing what they said they would do. But if that's the case, does that mean that when you find out about stories about how Fred Hampton was murdered, how the FBI took out Fred Hampton, when you hear these stories, these have been confirmed, by the way, the confirmed ones, that the FBI and the NYPD killed Malcolm X, if it's so much of a concern of being divisive, dividing the American people and upsetting the American people to find out this information, then why was that information even reported? That's something to think about because people want to know the truth. The American people want to know the truth. They don't necessarily always want to know what's going to make them feel better. And that's something we have to get past, especially in media. Like, I'm not here to send out people vibes. Like, I'm not here to send you vibes, bro. Like, I'm not. I'm here to present the truth. And sometimes the truth may make you uncomfortable, but that's okay. We have to learn how to deal with those uncomfortable truths as well. So it's almost like, again, what Matt Taibbi explained to me in reference to the Twitter files is that our government wants to tell us what to think. They don't want us to like believe on our own. They want to tell us what to think, They want to tell us what we should believe and what we should believe in. And that is very dangerous. Just so we can be relaxed and feel comfortable. Because if everybody knew the truth, we would be angry people. And if we're all angry people, what does that do? That can give the way to a real revolution. That's why they want us to be sheep.
The way that you bring people together is by telling people the truth and getting them to agree on facts. If I'm wrong in any of the facts I told you, you should challenge me. And other people should challenge me, because I feel that my job is to search for empirical truths and then to be honest with people about it. And because you can't, if you try to censor people, if you try to lie to them about what's happening, that our government is broken, if you try to lie about that, it just divides them further. You have to acknowledge, okay, there's a problem. And, I'm a former drug addict. And the first thing that you do, if you want to deal with drug addiction, is you admit there's a problem. And then you can deal with everything. And we need to admit there's a problem in our government before we're able to heal it. And, before we're able to heal our country.
The rock.
This is right. We have to stop sugarcoating things because we think that the American people can't handle the news. I mean, it's like we are trying to alert people to the fact that we are getting closer and closer to a nuclear war. Should I just keep that information to myself so that everybody can feel comfortable and go on with their everyday life and watch Netflix and get froyo? And
I guess in your sense of things goes deep and wide. We're talking about big swathes of the government as well as the media, heads of corporations. It almost feels a little bit like a revolution when you talk about it, because there must be many, many thousands of people who are in positions of power who you would want out. Do you think of it as a revolution?
I think of it as that we need a revolution. I would say that, but a peaceful revolution, and a revolution that brings us back to the values that have been robbed from us over the past 40 years. Systematically through, and that I watched happen. I mean, I was watching what happened in 1980. And we had a functioning government there, and we were in the middle of the great prosperity, and we had, most Americans trusted the government, and we all trusted the media. And today, 22% of Americans trust their government, 22% trust the media. And the reason we have all this blizzard of misinformation, is called misinformation, is because people are looking for other sources of information that they can actually trust, because the people who are supposed to be giving us good information are not. It's spin, it's propaganda.
Yep.
It's government orchestrated, and people know it. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows we were lied to about COVID. Everybody knows we were lied to about Vietnam. Everybody knows we were lied to about Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction. It's not this. My opinion about these agencies is not happening in a vacuum. Everybody knows that Pharma lied to us about opioids and about Vioxx. These are not like things that are conspiracy theories that, Robert Kennedy is crazy because he thinks a corrupted FDA, helped the pharmaceutical companies create the opioid crisis.
Sounds about right. It sounds like something they would do so that they can make money. They don't care if people die. JB said the thing about revolution is that even if we're peaceful, the powers that be will make it violent because that's the language they speak to maintain power. That's a good point. When he talks about a revolution, and we can talk about this later on call-in as well. I want to hear your opinions. When he talks about a revolution, he said it needs to be peaceful. Do you think that's something that's possible? Something to think about. Now, I want to go ahead and go to the next clip because he also had a more recent interview with Sean Hannity, and God bless him. Because I told you, I'm sorry. This is the second Sean Hannity interview that I'm presenting. You guys know I'm not fond of his interviews because he likes to interrupt people Sabby don't like. I don't like that he does that. I like to hear people answer a question, but whatever. People have different styles. It is what it is. But Case Study QB caught this today, and I'm glad that he did. I want to play part of this as well, where he also goes into this issue that he has with the CIA, because this was trending because so many people were like, whoa, what did he just say? So listen to this. We'll play part of it.
All right, Hannity, hot seat time. Nightmare new numbers for Joe Biden with an unexpected challenge from inside his own party. A recent Fox News poll shows nearly 30% of Democratic primary voters are abandoning Joe for his opponents, Robert Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson. RFK Jr. is polling at a whopping 20%. Also, RFK Jr. made headlines with his comments about the CIA's alleged involvement in the assassination of his uncle. That would be former President John F. Kennedy. Take a look.
Do you believe they murdered or were involved in the murder of your uncle? What have you come to personally?
The CIA, yes, they were definitely involved in the murder and the 60-year cover-up. They're still not releasing the papers that legally they have to release. But I don't think there's any doubt if you look at this huge, monumental mountain of evidence and confessions, and, so many people have confessed to their involvement.
Robert Kennedy Jr. joins us now. Great to have you back, sir. How are you?
I think that podcast is the All In podcast. I believe that's the name of the one that he was on.
How are you, Sean? Good to be back.
Okay, you said the evidence is overwhelming and beyond any reasonable doubt that the CIA was involved in the killing of your uncle, a U.S. president. What is the evidence?
Well, there's millions of pages of documents, of CIA documents, of transcripts, of recorded conversations from the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. It's hard to summarize the evidence. There are, as I said in that podcast, there are confessions of people who were directly involved in the plot, who were involved in the planning of the plot, who were peripheral to the plot. There's a 60-year cover-up. The Warren Commission was run by Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired, and then insinuated himself onto the Warren Commission and essentially ran the Warren Commission and kept this evidence from the Warren Commissioners. By the way, when Congress, 10 years later, investigated the crime with much more evidence than the Warren Commission had at its disposal, Congress found that, it was a plot. It was a conspiracy. There were multiple people involved. And most of the people in that investigation believed that it was the CIA that was behind it, because the evidence was so overwhelming to them.
I never believed that one man could act alone to take down the president of the United States. I always had questions about that. I had a book report I had to do one time when I was in high school about JFK, and my teacher was very upset because I went to the library and I sought out books that were a little bit more truthful, not my history book. I wanted to find out more about what happened to JFK. And my teacher did not like that report. She tried to give me a D on it. And by the way, I was like AB student. So, that didn't fly well. And when I asked her why she gave me a D on it, she said, there's just no way that this could have happened. And I said, well, the assignment was a book report. The assignment was not your opinion, like what you think happened. The assignment was to pick a book about a political figure and do a book report. And that's what I did. She didn't like the book that I chose because the book that I chose doubted that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And I did that report, and I did a kick-ass report, and she had to come back and she had to reverse that grade. But this goes to show you again how even our teachers, even they're propagandized. Look at it. They can't even pick the curriculum they want to pick to teach. The school board tells you the curriculum. You got to go with that. You can't pick the books that you want your students to read in the classroom. I worked in education. I know you can't pick the books that you want your students to read in the classroom. You have to pick the books that are approved by the curriculum, by the school board. So there's a lot of propaganda that happens throughout our lives. It's not just the media. It's also the education system. It's all controlled. Think outside the box, guys. That's all I ask.
The magic bullet never made any sense to me. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, none of it made any. I mean, Jack Ruby, even when I was a little boy, Sean, I was in the White House. My uncle was, laying at rest in the East Room, being waked. And I was standing in the main floor of the White House with my Aunt Jackie Kennedy and my father and my mother. And President Johnson came in and told us that Lee Harvey Oswald had just been killed by Jack Ruby. And and I said to my mom at that point, I turned to her and I said, why did he kill him? Did he love our family? Well, that's a lingering question. What was Jack Ruby doing there? My father, when he investigated Jack Ruby, he found out that Jack Ruby had been deeply involved with Carlos Marcello's mob, with Sam Giancana, and all the people who were all of those mob leaders, Santos Traficante, who were the Havana casino owners, who had been recruited by the CIA in the Castro murder plot. So they were all working together in cahoots with the CIA. By the way, the day that my uncle was killed, I was picked up at Sidwell Friends School and brought home. The first phone call that my father made after J. Edgar Hoover told him that his brother had been shot was to the CIA desk officer in Langley, who was only a mile from our house.
Yeah.
And my father said to him, did your people do this? His next call was Harry Ruiz, who was one of the Cuban Bay of Pigs leaders who had remained very, very close to our family and to my father. My father asked him the same question. Then my father called John McComb, who was the head of the CIA, and asked him to come to the house. McComb came over, and when I came home from Sidwell Friends School, my father was walking in the yard with John McComb, and my father was posing the same question to him. Was it our people who did this to my brother? So it was my father's first instinct that the agency had killed his brother.
This is probably the first guest I've seen Sean Hannity not really interrupt. Because what can you say? Aiden said it's almost like he goes into these interviews and the interviewer is like, oh, he actually knows his shit. Exactly. When he says, do you have evidence? Yeah, let me tell you what I know.
We could spend a whole show on it. Let me go to your campaign. You are now polling at a very respectable 19% in one poll, 20% in another poll. But the polling against Joe Biden is horrible. 68% of people think he's too old, and 63% think he's not mentally fit. Do you agree with me that I do not believe Joe Biden is cognitively strong enough to be president?
I don't have enough information about that because I have not seen Joe Biden.
I'm not asking you to be a doctor, but when you look at him, does he seem like he's got it together? Come on, be honest. Does he seem like he has it together?
You know what? I have questions, but I will leave that to other people. I think that Joe Biden, the reason I'm running is because I don't like what Joe Biden is doing with this country. I don't like the war in Ukraine that we should have settled that war a long time ago. We're sending $113 billion over there. The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion. The budget of CDC is $12 billion. We have 57% of Americans who could not put their hand on $1,000 if they had an emergency.
Or $500. You guys talking about 1,000. I know people get like not even $500. But again, like this proves like him and Marianne are not willing to say that Joe Biden is experiencing cognitive decline, that no, he is not fit to be president in 2024. I don't know why they won't say that. I wish they just would. Like, if you asked me, I would just tell you like, no, he is not fit to be president in 2024.
We have a quarter of Americans who are going to bed hungry. Food stamps last month, when we announced that when we topped off these huge payments to Ukraine, And at the same time, 300 billion to the Silicon Valley Bank. We cut food stamps by 90% to 30 million Americans. We cut Medicaid to 15 million. So there's an imbalance in this country. There's this idea that we should be the policemen of the world. And by the way, what we're doing in Ukraine is not good for the Ukrainian people. We have killed 300,000 Ukrainian troops, 14,000 civilians.
Well, Europe has stepped up.
Geopolitical machination to in our own plot to try to get rid of Putin and try to exhaust the Russian army, and we're sacrificing the Ukrainian people in that vanity.
All right, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it there because it is a longer interview, but I do have call in as well, and I do have a poll to get to. Eric, let me know when you have the poll ready, and we can go ahead and read the results of that poll because yeah, it's something, but I think if you're gonna, come out and say the CIA is corrupt, please don't turn around and then say there are good people there and we need them. No, no, you cannot both sides it. I think this is something that him and Marianne are both doing with different issues, but they're both doing it. It's like I guess they don't want to come across as too radical, right? But I think that's what the country needs right now. I think the country needs someone who's more radical. I think they need someone who's willing to go where Bernie wouldn't go.